Yeah.
as needed.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Welcome to the Minneapolis Pedestrian Advisory Engineering Committee. Please note that this meeting may involve the remote participation by members, either by telephone or other electronic means, due to the local health emergency, novel coronavirus pandemic, pursuant to the provisions of MinStat section 13D.021. We'll call this meeting to order, and the agenda, we will note that we will go items 3, 6, 4, 5 in light of some scheduling issues, and to get right straight to it. I'd like to call Kelly and Chris to talk about the Lowry Avenue Northeast project.
Hi, good afternoon,
Hi,
everyone.
Hello.
I'm the Hennepin County project manager for the reconstruction of 2 phases of Lowry Avenue Northeast from Marshall Street to Johnson Street. And I was able to bring some information to your committee on December 16th of 2021 at the 15% stage, where we were considering a couple of options. So I'm bringing some updates on that progress today, and the fact that we've kind of narrowed in on one layout at this point that we're looking at refining a bit more. So I was going to just share the layout on the screen and talk through some updates as I scroll through that, and then provide some schedule information and take any questions you might have today.
Please do.
Okay, sounds great. I will share the layout. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen?
You can see it.
Okay, thank you. I was going to start at Johnson Street on the far east end of the project and scroll west from there. So the main point is that we've been focusing on a layout that includes a shared use path along Lowry Avenue for the length of both phases, all the way from Marshall Street to Johnson Street. And that's kind of been based on feedback we've been getting through these committee meetings and a public workshop that was held in December as well, and comments through our social pinpoint site. So another comment was to look at putting the shared use path on the north side of the roadway, where we had been showing it on the south side previously. So that's how we've depicted it in this version of the layout that has been shared for the meeting this evening. We've also been working with Metro Transit on their local stops and how those are shown on our layout at corners of where there will continue to be local stops, and have coordinated with Metro Transit as well on stops that they're planning to remove or consolidate with our project. So stops that exist today but are being removed as part of the project are in the black and white Metro Transit logo, and the red and white logos are stops that will be either new or maintained as part of the project. And in addition to that, we're talking to Metro Transit about their future BRT plans for Lowry Avenue. So we've been looking at space for BRT stations at Central Avenue and Lowry, that intersection, and also the Johnson Street and Lowry Avenue intersection. So Fillmore Street is an example of where a new Metro Transit stop will be located, instead of having local service stops at Taylor Street and Pierce Street. So the Pierce Street and Taylor Street stops will be consolidated to Fillmore instead. And to assist in the fact that Metro Transit buses will be stopping in lane on Lowry Avenue, we're looking at having a center median on Lowry Avenue to deter vehicles from passing around a stopped bus at Fillmore. So that's a change to this version of the layout that you wouldn't you didn't see before. Otherwise, in this 2-lane vehicular section of Lowry Avenue, just wanted to go down to a typical section of what that looks like as well. 11-foot through lanes with curb and gutter. So you have 2 feet to the face of curb as well. So in plan view, it's labeled as 13 feet, but effectively the lane is 11 feet. And then we'd have boulevards and a sidewalk on the south side of the road and a shared use path on the north side of the road. And moving west toward the intersection with Central Avenue, you start to see the change in lanes go from 2 to 3. A change with what we're looking at in the areas where we are proposing 3 lanes, either if it's a shared center left turn lane or a dedicated left turn lane. We're looking at those being effectively 10-foot lanes each. So I have an example typical section of what that would look like as well. And then in areas along Lowry to the west of Central Avenue, we also show medians in select locations, and then are showing some cut-throughs for pedestrian refuge areas to cross Lowry Avenue. Let's see. Just trying to think of what the other highlights are. We're still looking at the possibility of raised crossings with the shared use path across side roads to Lowry Avenue, and are looking at bump outs for the city side roads intersecting Lowry Avenue as well. And then I just wanted to go to continuing west on the layout. So Washington Street is approximately the dividing line for the phase 1 construction and phase 2 construction. So Washington Street to Johnson Street would be constructed first with our project, and that is, it had been anticipated to begin in 2023. We're shifting that to 2024 for construction to begin of phase 1. Phase 2 construction is anticipated to begin in 2025. So everything west of this dark dashed line and west of Washington Street would be constructed a little bit later, starting in 2025. So again, we have areas in this phase of Lowry Avenue that have center medians or have a 3-lane configuration, either a shared left turn lane or a dedicated left turn lane. And then a section that shows what it looks like with a median, what it could look like with a median. If you have a 6-foot wide median, then you have effectively 11-foot lanes on each side of that, one in each direction for vehicles. They're labeled as 14 because that includes the space to the face of curb, both on the median side and the outer side. So you have 1-foot curb on the median side and a 2-foot curb pan on the outer side of the lane. So that totals up to 14 feet. And that's the minimum dimension that we've gotten from our maintenance staff on space that they need to operate through next to a median like this. I also wanted to show some changes at University Avenue and Lowry Avenue. Previously, we had been showing a more abrupt shift in the alignment of Lowry Avenue that would have had bigger impacts to the adjacent properties. So we looked at what we could do to change the alignment of Lowry Avenue to still accommodate turning vehicles, turning trucks, but reduce impacts to adjacent properties as much as possible, but also still maintain boulevard space and accommodations for keeping the shared use path and sidewalks going through, paralleling Lowry. So that's a change to what you had seen previously as well. And I think those are the main highlights. And I also just wanted to show one more typical section here of an example where you have 3 lanes next to each other all the way across, where we'd be looking at 10-foot lanes. And then on the outsides where we have curb and gutter, we'd have 2 additional feet to the face of curb. Some boulevard space, sidewalk, and a shared use path. And this is an example of what the roadway could look like on the far west end of the project, closer to Marshall Street and Lowry Avenue. So I hit on the construction schedule a bit and how we're looking at shifting that. I'm working with Chris to plan out another round of public information workshop to talk through these updates in more detail. We currently have plans for that to be May 11th. And then we were looking at the timing of seeking municipal approval either later in May or early June of this year, so that we can start to get into the details of the designs more and get input on things like intersection details and just more of the details than what this level layout gets into. Is there any part of the layout that I can go back to take anyone's questions on anything specific at this time?
I have a sort of logistics question and then a specific question. Let's see, this is at 30%. Will you be coming back after additional community outreach and planning, or is this is basically it?
I mean, we'd like consensus on just the lane configuration that we're showing and the bike facility type, and the municipal approval is focused on those kinds of aspects and not much more detailed than that, I guess. So when we get into the detailed design, there will still be opportunities for input. Larger changes would require just going through the municipal approval process again, most likely.
And so with that being said, you're looking for a motion, a resolution today then?
Correct.
And then my specific question is, you stated that 14-foot section that involves a median in the center. Did I understand right that Public Works said that's the minimum that they can operate in? It was 11 plus 2 plus 1.
Yes.
It was the 14 feet. Is your understanding that's because of an existing Why is that? I'll just why.
Sure.
Why is that?
My understanding is it's based on the type of snowplow equipment that the county has and that they use, and just to also have some, wiggle room to the curbs so that their equipment isn't, damaging the curb as it removes snow and ice and things like that.
I'm asking, this is maybe not specific for this, but do you have any understanding if Public Works are they going to maintain this size of snowplow for urban use? Or because it seems like we're building roadways to fit a truck, and the roadway is going to last longer than the truck. If we could start getting more urban scale trucks, then we can have more, in my opinion, appropriately sized lanes. If we're building wider lanes at 14 feet to accommodate a snow removal truck, maybe we could change the snow removal truck, and then we can have a little bit more flexibility in your work. Have you heard anything that they're committed to this size of truck to have a homogeneous fleet of this kind of truck, or do you know anything about that?
I don't have an answer for that. No, I've just
right.
gotten the information that they would prefer 14 feet where we can provide that dimension.
Well, thank you for that. There was a little crystal ball. I was curious. Does anybody else? Oh, Paul, I see your hands up.
Yes. Couple quick questions. So on your cross sections, Kelly, you show a 2 foot and all the way up to 5 foot distance between the edge of the shared use path and the right of way line. Is that for the clear zone, or is there encroachments in that area, or what's the reasoning for that?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so the shared use path would need 2 feet for a clear zone on either side. So we're providing that wherever we can. The sidewalk technically doesn't have a clear zone, but we are trying to have a little bit of space to the right of way, just in case there are existing encroachments that can be avoided, or just for constructability too, so that we can keep the work within the right of way.
Okay. And then also in the sections where you have a median, I think it's either 4 feet wide or 6 feet. Are those going to be landscaped or just hard surface medians?
We're looking at hard surface medians in this layout, and are trying to maximize the green space in the boulevards on the outer sides of the roadway. So things that are depicted, areas that are depicted in green are areas that we believe could be planted, or some sort of greening or stormwater treatment area.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have their hand up? Oh, go ahead. Julia?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. So firstly, I'm noticing that we don't have all our crossings, and I wasn't able to see the presentation, so I'm sorry if this got covered, but I'm noticing at first, and then especially 6th and 7th, where there's quite a distance between pedestrian crossings. And I'd like to see those added back in per city policy. So especially the 6th and 7th, it's just, it's quite a distance without having those accessible crossings, and especially with a median, it is more difficult. And then I am curious if you can push for the 18-inch gutter pans along here. I'm concerned, I know that a lot of the planning for this road has to do with it being a truck route, which means that we have noisier vehicles, and that really impacts pedestrian experience. So having particularly wide streets encourages faster speeds, and that leads to higher auditory volumes and greater stress on pedestrians. So it seems like exactly where we'd want to be using the 18-inch gutter pan. And I'm also curious about the benefits of the medians for pedestrians. Since we're getting wider lanes due to them, I'm fairly concerned about seeing sort of that 13-foot default along bus routes, and where we've got where we're asking people to walk and bike in particular.
So specifically the crossings where there are medians, Julia, you were saying? Oh,
so the crossings at First Street Northeast, there's not cut throughs in the median, and then at 6th and 7th, and I could be missing them. It wasn't. The 6th and 7th are adjacent to the railroad track bridge, and so there's a much greater distance there between where you can cross, and then the medians just make it even more difficult for anyone who has any mobility issues and can't easily climb or mount a raised median. So I'm really wanting to make sure we have all of our legal crossings for people walking and using wheelchairs. And then just understanding what benefits the medians produce for pedestrians, since they come with those wider lanes based on, I share Christopher's concerns about how we're designing for trucks right now, but given that, I'm curious how medians benefit pedestrians, since they do lead to wider lanes in how we're talking about it today.
Okay. I think those comments make sense. The areas where we do have pedestrian cut-throughs or refuge depicted are where this median is 6 feet wide. So that's the minimum to consider it a refuge space. And I do see your comment though on the distance between, in this case, between 5th and 7th or Washington Street, though. We narrow the median in between there to 4 feet to try to balance some boulevard space and space for the bike and ped facilities going along Lowry there. So I do see your comment though on the distance between
on
those.
a 4-foot median, you can't do a pedestrian cut through?
I would say that it just wouldn't necessarily provide enough width for a pedestrian to comfortably stand and wait to cross in stages.
Yeah, I understand that. I just am seeing it continuing throughout and preventing the crossings along there, along 6th and at 7th.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Kelly,
Yeah,
could
and then
I,
I just,
I was going to jump in with a question for you, Julia, if you don't mind.
mhm.
On the 7th Street intersection, that was also something that we had kind of pointed out of having the crossing there. That something I'd like this group's feedback on. That the crossing on the west side is right next to that bridge, and so I was a little concerned that perhaps the visibility, if you imagine a pedestrian crossing from the north side to the south side, they'd be blocked by those bridge piers. And I just wanted your feedback on if you would prefer to have a crossing there, which might encourage pedestrians to use it, despite it potentially being unsafe due to visibility. So I don't know if this group has thoughts on it. I'd be interested.
Narrow the lane, a 15-foot, like make it a 10-foot through lane so that people have to slow down when they're driving. And I mean, I just don't think we can remove pedestrian facilities because we can't trust drivers to be responsible. And if it's a matter of us designing lanes that are so wide that people are going faster than they should for a low visibility pedestrian crossing, we need to design so that drivers are going slow enough for a low visibility pedestrian crossing. But we can't remove pedestrian facilities to facilitate, you know, having no people walking anywhere because drivers might not be looking for people in the city. That's my view.
I appreciate the feedback. If anyone else has thoughts on that, I'd be interested, but we don't have to get hung up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I echo that. I think that you start with this project should be based, first of all, install safe pedestrian infrastructure. And if certain portions of it can't be installed safely, then as you go down the pyramid to bicycles or private cars or trucks, then that thing has to be changed. But I think the you start with making sure that the most vulnerable users are safe, and in this case, it's pedestrians, and they shouldn't give. I agree. I agree with Julia. This is just a case where you know, centering the motor vehicle traffic is taking away something that should be present in a pedestrian infrastructure, and it's being taken away because of a design or anticipated use by motor vehicles. And I don't know. I think this is. You're right, Chris. I mean, it's one crossing, but it's one huge issue.
I'll just pitch in on the on that intersection. Couldn't you put a raised median in on the easterly side of the intersection, so that since there's no left turn for westbound traffic in that section, and then put a nice crosswalk in at that intersection on the east side.
I see your point there. We'll look at what length we would need for just the left turns to turn onto Washington Street here and see what would be possible there. I see what you mean.
Is there anyone else with a comment or question?
I'm not understanding the benefits of the medians for pedestrians.
Again, so the pedestrian could cross the street half at a time, and then there'd be a refuge in the middle of the street.
Okay, so
And
that's
we're-
where it's the 6-foot ones. But I mean, we're also seeing 4-foot ones. So I guess I'm just concerned that we might be seeing car-based infrastructure that is limiting or creating worse conditions for pedestrians.
Can I jump in again, Kelly? One other thing to note, Julia, is that the trade-off there would be to have the center turn lane. The county's expressed that they're not interested in having just 2 through lanes without separation and allowing left turns there. So really the difference that we're looking at is between 2 lanes with a median, which would allow a pedestrian to take 1 lane of traffic at a time and would also have a slowing effect anytime you put something in the roadway. I would bet that would slow vehicles more than a 12, 10, 12 with nothing in the center. You get something called a gateway effect, and we could be looking at signage here and other things like that. So I do actually think that it does provide pedestrian safety at those places,
I appreciate
despite
that
a little bit bigger lane width.
Okay, I appreciate the context of the county being car-oriented in its approach, and therefore this being our best bet. I would just like to reiterate then that whatever we can do to get those 18-inch gutter pans would be great. And thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands. So with that, I'd like to thank Kelly and Chris. And we'll move on to agenda item number 6, the 9th, 10th Street bikeways. I guess this is back to you, Chris, and thanks again, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly. All right. So I am here with what I'm calling 15%, but want to just acknowledge that this is the first time that this has been to this committee. And the reason for that really is because there's some history on this corridor with 9th and 10th. We in the past have tried to put a bike facility on this road, a protected facility, sometime in the last decade. I want to say 6 or 7 years ago. And that project did not go through at the time. And so the approach that we've taken here is to start with something that just shows a proof of concept of how we can do this and still maintain some of the interests of the stakeholders along the corridor, primarily which is maintaining parking and loading zones and things like that. So this first proof of concept that I'm going to show you is not a final product, even though it looks maybe a little more designed than we typically do at 15%. Everything is still on the table, and this is just kind of a starting point to get people to the table. And basically we've had some differences in design changes since then that allow us to do some different stuff than the last time we looked at it. We have the ability to do thinner lanes where the city wasn't doing 10-foot lanes or things like that in the past. So just wanted to provide some of that context as to why it's coming at 15% for the first time. So, and this actually needs to be updated. It's a 2023 project. And we're looking at 9th and 10th Street downtown between Hennepin Avenue and Chicago on 9th, and then Hennepin Avenue and Park Ave on 10th. There's a little picture of kind of the existing conditions on 9th there. Got a parking lane, 3 lanes of travel that are probably somewhere around 12 to 13 feet or something like that right now. Little buffer on the bike lane, and then parking again. This is a high injury street. 9th is specifically a high injury street. And I do have actually more recent data that I'll be updating with this that I recently received that shows very similar stuff. When pedestrians are hit by vehicles, the injuries rate is high. Same with bicycles. And with motor vehicles, you know, there's a lot of crashes, less likely to be injured, but there are a lot of motor vehicle crashes out here as well. So the intent is to make this safer for all users. Yeah, I think I'm going to just hop over to the the layout now. So again, this kind of proof of concept is what I'm calling it. Definitely up to change. This is a striping and bollard protected bikeway project. I did just work on a regional solicitation application that we submitted for, I believe it's 2027. And so that project would bring in more money to allow us to do things with the curb, look at curb protected bikeway and the potential for some things off, potentially behind the curb at sidewalk level as well, and key locations. And then one other thing to note on this layout before we go through, like I said, this is a Hindry street. We will be implementing Vision Zero improvements as well. Some of those come just kind of from the bikeway project, but there will also be locations along this corridor where we'll be looking to add temporary bump outs on the other side of the street, perhaps some signage and any of the other, our Vision Zero team will be kind of reviewing this and making sure that all their standard things are brought in here as well. So starting on 9th, I'm just going to kind of move through this and then we can come back for questions. We've got a parking protected bikeway, looking at some pretty wide buffer here and bike lane. 9th is 2 lanes on here until we get a little further into the corridor. Similarly to the other stuff, some of the details that we'll look at is kind of protected elements and how we want to protect, which are also added benefits for pedestrians in virtually all cases where we use protected elements. That kind of makes the crossing distance shorter where they're crossing motorized vehicles in the space. Again, maintaining all access points and parking in this proof of concept. There's the potential to remove parking if it aids the design, and we feel that's the right thing to do. And the intent is hopefully to remain all, keep all loading zones and things like that as well. Some of these mixing zones as shown, also we'll be looking to see if we can do that in a protected fashion instead. These are still things that we've used and can be good treatments. But we'll be looking into more detail as to whether we have the bike come up here and kind of cars mix here. These angles are calculated so that you have bicyclists able to see the vehicle and the vehicle able to see the bicyclist. But if we can get a protected facility in all the way through the intersection, that's kind of our ideal. So we'll be striving for that. And really just kind of similar things. I'm happy to go back to any of these blocks later if anyone has specific questions. It's also important to note that there's a lot of one ways, or like on Marquette here, vehicles can't turn left because it's bus only. And so in those cases, there's no conflict between left turning vehicles and bikes, which means we can just extend a normal bikeway to the corner in many locations. I'm just going to kind of move through quickly. It's a lot of pretty repetitive. We'll tie into the Hennepin County project there as well. On 10th, so in total, there's 100 parking spots on both of these corridors. There are 23 of those are on 10th, so there's a lot less parking, but it is constrained in some areas. And so you'll see there's no parking here. We'll figure out the mixing zones, same thing with the protected intersections. 2 blocks where this kind of proof of concept, where we're just kind of seeing what happens if we maintain all vehicle lanes and maintain parking. For 2 of these blocks between what is it, LaSalle and Marquette, we actually can't fit in a AAA quality bikeway, a protected facility, without removing either parking or a lane of travel. And so we'll be looking into both of those options to try and make sure that we connect the AAA facility throughout the length of this corridor. And that's something that we'll be engaging on throughout this process. And again, pretty straightforward. A lot of 10th, there's not any parking on the bikeway side. So it's just kind of a standard biking, be looking at protected elements, figure out how those work best. And then at like the I-35 interchange ramp kind of area there, 10th goes down to 2 lanes and Bikeway continues. Pretty straightforward for the rest of the way until we get to this intersection with Park, which is a tricky one. So the bicyclist, if a bicyclist is traveling along 10th and wants to take a left onto Park, they need to go to the far side as it is currently built. They need to go to the far side of the street. There are also 2 lanes of left turning vehicles. So essentially we would be putting vehicles cutting across bikes, which is not something that we want. And so this design, quite frankly, will be able to do a lot better than this. I don't think that this works. We'll be looking at taking away potentially left turning vehicles so that one of these lanes is only straight through. And those are the types of things we'll be looking for there. But it is tricky because then you also have bikes that if you want to go straight, that's on the right side of the roadway here. So just kind of gonna brainstorm and do some designing around how to best get bicyclists through that intersection with minimal conflict. So with that, I will stop there, and if anyone has questions or wants me to go back to a certain point in the presentation, I'm happy to do so.
I'll jump in with a logistic question and then another question. So this is a 15%. You'll be back. Are you looking for any motion now or guidance now, or are you still, for example, at Park putting things together to looking for input later?
I don't need a resolution now. If anyone has ideas for any of these, I'm happy to take them, and we'll definitely take those under consideration. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal resolution. I'll definitely be back at 30%, or maybe even like an interim before 30% when we do some of the protected intersection design. I definitely want feedback on those, because there will be anywhere between, I think, like 6 and 10 or 11 intersections that potentially could have protected elements, which I think the pedestrian perspective on those will be important.
I see a number of hands, but I'm going to recognize Peter Vader's hand first. He wrote a couple of questions because he's not able to attend today, so he asked me to ask them at this point. The 2 questions, one is regarding winter maintenance of these downtown protected bike lanes. Specifically, what is the plan to handle snow behind these protected bike lanes, just logistically what that is and what the plan is. And then secondly, and I'm not quite sure I follow this, he states, can the 9th Street bike lane run on the same side of the street on both sides of Hennepin? Currently, the bike lane arrangement hops from the left side of 9th before Hennepin to the right side after. An opinion is to put riders on the right side the whole way with the professionally operated buses. So maintenance, and then
yeah, cool.
Thanks
for sharing those questions. So yeah, with maintenance, we are working with our maintenance team to make sure that the bike lanes and where the bollards go are wide enough for our vehicles, the vehicles that they use downtown. And there's plenty of space throughout this corridor. We have already had them take a look. So we'll continue to do that, especially with the protected elements. That'll be something we want to make sure that those are usable and vehicles can get in there as well to remove snow. And I believe, some of the snow will be hauled away. I don't have a ton of details on that. That's maybe something I can try and get for next time. Some of it they'll leave kind of in that buffer area, but eventually they do go through with these temporary projects and try and remove that snow, especially if it builds up. And I'm not really sure if there's a difference with parking protected, so we are coordinating on that front. And the question about 9th being on the other side of the street, putting the bikeway on the other side of the street is one that I've heard several times. I think that will be better suited, that regional solicitation application, which I think we have a strong case for, and hopefully will be awarded. That actually extends beyond Hennepin, all the way to Glenwood, I believe, maybe to 7th. I can't remember the exact end, but it does go past there. And so I think it'll be better suited with that project to potentially change the docks on the other side of Hennepin, or really just to take that question under consideration of how do we make this whole corridor complete without needing to switch back and forth. So for several reasons, I think it makes sense right now to keep this bikeway as it is. I think we'll have more support from stakeholders along the corridor. There's been some desire to activate the street on this side of the street where the bike lane is. And so trying to kind of garner that support and lean into that, I think will be useful for this project.
Thank you, Chris. I see Barb and Paul's hand were up. I didn't notice which came up first. So Barb, why don't we begin with you?
And I am taking notes, just so you know, Christopher.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, my question is this, when you're doing the quick striping and the bollards and protected stuff, is that, you see that as temporary for a couple of years? Are you collecting material on whether or not this is working, or will you be collecting information about that after you do this project?
Yeah, so when we say temporary, it basically means no concrete work.
Yeah.
That temporary could be anywhere from like 1 to 2 years. It really just kind of depends on when the funding comes through to do a more permanent project. In this case, if we get awarded that regional solicitation, in 2027, we would come through. So it would be like a 4-year project. We would definitely be looking at how it's working in terms of project management for that future project. Would want to know, is it working like this? Do we need to change things? And things of that nature. But there's no like formal evaluation plan as of right now. But that's something that we could potentially talk to our evaluation program and see if that fits in with their priorities.
I was just thinking, because it is a high injury street, especially 9th, that if you do these stripings and change and protect that, make sure that all the bikeways are not concrete, but protected. It might be interesting to see safety wise, how many injuries there are and that kind of stuff. So it'd be good to collect that data. So.
And we that data is constantly collected. It comes through the state. And so we'll absolutely be able to do like a before and after type of thing with that, which I think you're right. That would be really informative.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Paul.
Chris, I'm wondering, 9th and 10th both, carry 3 lanes of through traffic. Have you looked at in the short or long term eliminating one of those lanes of traffic to free up more room for bike lanes, widening sidewalks, etc.?
Yeah. So personally, with this type of temporary project on 9th and 10th here, essentially what we'd be looking at if we like took away a lane of travel, for example, is 10 feet of extra space that would go and create a 13-foot buffer, which, to me, I think there's a couple things. I think one, people might look at it and say, why'd you take that lane away for nothing? And then 2, cars might go into it and it might be hard to kind of control that space and have it actually have some of those benefits. We get cars going into bike lanes all the time. So in my mind, I think that's a really, like, that absolutely should be examined as part of the regional solicitation project when we come back with more concrete work, because then I think, if you're blocking off those areas with permanent curb, that could make more sense. And maybe you do some sort of greening, or I don't know, you could program that space or something like that. But I'm hesitant to kind of have that battle with this because it would, there would be people who would push back on that, and it could potentially kind of hurt us down the line with that regional solicitation project, where we might it might make more sense to tackle them.
Okay, makes sense.
I've got a question.
Julia?
I just am trying to remember how speeding and reducing speeding fits into Vision Zero, since this is touching on Vision Zero. And since what I notice on the corridor is just the intense speeds that drivers go.
Yeah, so narrowing the lanes is one major thing that we point to as a speed reduction technique. So that in itself is one thing. Also, the protected elements that we would be looking at would be intended to kind of slow cars and make the cars turn at angles where they are then more likely to see a bicyclist or pedestrian and stop. And so we know that pedestrians and bicyclists are more likely to be hit at signalized intersections, all of which these are, and those left-hand turning movements can be dangerous. So I would expect safety benefits there. And then also, looking at potential for like bump outs on the other side of the street is just anytime you add that kind of vertical element, it narrows kind of the field of vision, and not going to slow every driver, but it does. The intention there is to slow drivers.
I appreciate that, and it makes sense for when there's more drivers, but the majority of the time when I'm down there, and this is, weekdays, it's basically any time that isn't half hour rush hour. It's so overbuilt that it just really invites a lot of speeding. And I'm curious if there are benefits. Do drivers go slower if it's 10-foot lanes when there's nobody around them and it's 3 and 1 way 10-foot lanes?
Theoretically, there's always going to be like a certain percentage of drivers who drive like recklessly fast. And in the times that you're talking about, on a roadway like this, or even on a 1 or a 2-lane roadway, design can only do so much if someone's committed to speeding. There's also like some signage. There's also some signage stuff that we'll look at, and I'm not sure that signal timing will be a part of this project. I think with downtown especially, it gets hard to do kind of a one-off street signal timing project, but that could be something to think about as we plan for the regional solicitation, which could have an impact on speed as well.
Since this is a temporary project, is there any chance to kind of try something a bit more outside of the box to address that heavy speeding on a low use road?
I guess, do you have any suggestions?
Pop-up blocks, something that, temporary things that change the lane uses. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know what best practices are out there. I don't know what other cities are doing. I know that having like just hugely overbuilt streets in the downtown zone is not unique to Minneapolis. So I guess I don't have a question so much as a comment. And if that is something that could be explored in this project, it seems like one that we could learn a lot from for other roads around Minneapolis.
Yeah, I don't envision I have seen things where lanes are blocked off by something that pops up out of the ground. Since we're not reconstructing anything, and I wouldn't expect that to be a part of this. And yeah, at a certain point, I think the fact that you've mentioned that it's overbuilt for off-peak hours especially is something to strongly consider when we put some concrete down out here. But it is a hard thing to tackle with a project like this.
Would the medians like we had on 4th, would something like that be considered temporary, or was that considered more permanent?
Were they like the yellow bollards? And
they were planter medians, the ones, or was it was the one that I believe it was before you were with the city, so maybe it isn't the best question for you, and I don't want to keep us from other elements, so ignore my question. Thank you for the answers.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Julia. I'm not seeing anybody else with a hand raised, but that doesn't necessarily mean one's not. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Chris? All right, hearing none, we will move on. Thanks, Chris, for that presentation. And then we're going to go to agenda item 4, Lindale Avenue South from Hennepin County. Kelsey and Josh, I think both are here.
Yep, that's correct.
Jump on in.
Sounds good. Hey, everyone. Kelsey Foat with the City of Minneapolis Public Works. We're here to talk about the Lindale project. It was here about a year ago as a potential project, and so we're here To share more information on that project, I have Josh Potter from Hennepin County and a couple members of our consultant team on the line as well.
Thanks,
Terrific.
Kelsey. Good evening, everyone. Josh Potter, working in our transportation group in Hennepin County. As Kelsey noted, here to talk about Lindale Avenue South. I'll let John introduce himself as well while I pull up the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Crawford. I work at KLJ, and as Josh mentioned, I'm the consultant project manager for the Lindale Avenue project. And we also have Bridget Bjorklund's on the line with us in case we need any help with some other public engagement items. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. All right, so just getting my screen set up here. The presentation. We've already introduced ourselves, so just want to go through what we plan to go talk about this evening. Just want to talk about some transportation goals, as well as some background data, talk about the safety improvements that we have planned here on Lindale Avenue. And certainly at the end, we'll have time for any feedback and questions. Talking about county and city transportation goals, I know many people in this group are familiar with the various plans that we have, from climate action to complete streets to transportation action plan and vision zero. Just kind of want to high level just focus on the facts, certainly geared towards all users. As we know historically in the past, our transportation infrastructure has been geared more towards the automobile, and certainly with these initiatives, we are trying to make a philosophy shift here. So just want to note that moving forward, really focusing on safety, livability, and all users. I'll pass it over to John.
All right, thanks, Josh. So we're going to run through some of the project background information, talk a little bit about the purpose of the project. As Josh mentioned, the pilot project will be piloting, excuse me, and evaluating the soon-to-be implemented 3-lane configuration. And to fully understand the change from its current configuration, we'll be comparing existing conditions to after implementation conditions. So we'll have a good, clean before and after comparison to look at. So in order to look at the existing conditions, we've been out collecting all kinds of data, transit and traffic, bikes and peds, crash information, parking. And on the next few slides, we have a few of those details. So the first one up is the daily traffic volume and the daily transit ridership. So north is on the right. The project is between 31st Street and Franklin Avenue. And the daily traffic volumes range between 22,000 and 30,000. And the daily transit ridership ranges between about 2,000 and 2,700 on the north. And then the next slide shows the walking and biking numbers in the project corridor. The blue columns on the chart are the pedestrian volumes, and the green bars are the bicycle volumes. Those are the total volumes at those intersections that are listed. And so people walking ranges between about 500 to 2,000 a day at each intersection, and biking is up to about 200 daily at the busiest intersections. So then on the next slide, we have some crash history information. This is from the last 10 years, or the most recent 10 years data that was available. And similarly to the previous graphs and charts, right is the north side. And the red dots show the injury crashes. And there's a larger red dot that was a fatality near 26th Street in 2019. The shading on the chart shows the total crash density, with red being the most dense. Generally, that's at the intersections, especially the busiest intersection at Lake Street and the less dense, the blue, is in between those intersections. The crash rate on the corridor for the last 10 years is 13 crashes per million vehicle miles, which is above the statewide average for a cross-section similar to this roadway, a 4-lane undivided urban with intersections. So then next, we're going to talk about some of the overview of the project. We'll talk about how the project's gotten to the stage that we're at. Why are we doing the project? What are some of the goals? And how's the schedule look? And then after that, we have about 5 slides that show some of the details of what the project will look like. So why is this a pilot project? Hennepin County is testing the project out before complete reconstruction, which should happen in about 5 to 7 years. So the project gives an opportunity to see how elements will work, to see what issues may need to be addressed as part of that permanent reconstruction. It is a high volume road with almost 30,000 vehicles per day. And that second bullet kind of gets to that point that typically a 3-lane road wouldn't be considered for 30,000 cars a day. Generally, the maximum that a 3-lane cross section might be considered would be about 18 to 20,000 vehicles per day. So with this high volume, the county is piloting the project to measure the before and after for safety and other metrics. The project evaluation will allow for an opportunity to collect feedback before the permanent decision is made and what the exact details of that permanent reconstruction will look like. So some of the project goals, obviously we want the project to be a success. So we're working to define what that means. Obviously safety is a huge part of the project. Access to the community and businesses is also very important. And we also have a significant community engagement effort showing people what the project will look like. And then during the implementation, we'll be looking for feedback from all users to find out what they think of the project. And so we are identifying some of the key challenges and solutions and using those, looking for our successes. In a couple of slides, or maybe it's even the next couple of slides, I'll talk about a couple of those benefits and challenges that we see on the project. So the schedule, you can see on the left side, we've been out collecting that existing data that I mentioned. Here we are getting close to the end of April already, and we're just starting the community engagement part of the project. The restriping will happen sometime during the month of June, and the actual restriping will only take a couple of days, but immediately before the restriping, the county will be out repaving the roadway with a new layer of asphalt. So then after the implementation, we'll be waiting for the users to get accustomed to the new configuration and adjusting to how they want to use the corridor. There will likely be some changes in traffic and delay and congestion and ease of biking and walking and rolling. So then after that settles out, we'll be back out in the fall to collect the same data that we collected last fall for our apples and apples comparison. Then on the next slide, overview of what the project is. 1 travel lane in each direction with a center left turn lane. Parking will remain on both sides of the road, virtually no change to parking. And transit stops will remain in similar locations. There may be some slight adjustments of a few feet here or there, but generally not much of a change. So some of the considerations and pros and cons that I've been alluding to. This slide coincidentally shows the example down at 28th Street, and we'll talk about the details of that in a couple more slides. But much of the corridor will look like this with a few variations for transit turn lanes and at the project termini down at 31st Street and Franklin Avenue. A few elements that have been considered in the project include the items that are listed here: parking, turn lanes, transit, pedestrian crossings, and safety for all users. And we're looking at how will residents, businesses, property owners, and users be benefited and impacted. Few of the positives that we anticipate as a part of the project include safer, easier crossing for all people walking and rolling, vehicle speeds, dedicated lanes, reduced crash severity, and no impact of parking. And going through that, I'll make a quick note about the safety on the corridor. With the existing 4-lane configuration, there is a lot of vehicle lane changing as they try to get around people that have stopped to make a turn, especially left turns. And so those drivers are looking in their rearview mirror, looking over their shoulder, trying to make decisions, speeding up, slowing down. So a very stressful situation with lots of things that they need to navigate. And with the proposed configuration as shown, with just 1 lane in each direction, the drivers are largely focused on what's immediately in front of them, and they don't have much of an option. They don't need to be making all of those decisions, so they can focus on bikes and peds and not hitting the car in front of them. And then when they do pull into a turn lane, they have a safe place to sit, to wait, to make that move. A few impacts that we anticipate, and we're trying to minimize these as we plan for the project. There may be increased delay. There may be vehicle backups at traffic signals. There is the potential for traffic spilling into adjacent and parallel streets and use of the side streets. And I did see the note right before the meeting that somebody wanted to ask about that, so we can talk about that a little bit more as we get into this. But that is a part of our data collection, is counting cars before and after on the adjacent streets and the parallel streets. I think the question was specific to Garfield, and I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head if that was included. We can check. And so on the next slide, we get in.
Was there a question? John, I was going to note Garfield is included in the data collection. Yep.
And was that the one that the question was about? And so the next couple of slides showing some examples. So here's 27th Street on the bottom left. You can see the Planet Soccer mural on the building. This is looking north. And so this happens to be one of the 2 locations where the pedestrian crossing safety improvements are going in. And so, thanks, Josh. There you can see the median. That's the construction of the median is starting right now. The 4 corners were constructed last fall, and Josh will talk about all the details of exactly what that pedestrian crossing will look like. But here you can see the 3-lane cross section with 1 through lane in each direction. In this particular location, there's no dedicated right turn lane at 27th. There are a couple of other places where there may be a dedicated right turn lane, but generally this is what it'll look like. And then you can see the center left turn lane and the parking that's remaining on the sides. So the next one is back to that same 28th Street that we saw a minute ago. No changes to parking, 1 lane per direction. And in this particular picture, the 2 cars that are facing us, the blue car that's about to make a southbound left and the gray car that's sitting in the through lane. I just want to point out one of the benefits is that little buffer between those 2 cars kind of provides for that blue car that's turning left the ability to really have good visibility of the opposing traffic in the through lane so that they can have a really clear view of when they will have a gap to make their left turn. I think that's all I had. Back to Josh.
Thanks, John. So talking about next steps here. So summer of 2022 through 2023, particularly evaluation. Certainly we want to hear from people about feedback on the pilot. As noted, we'll be collecting a lot of data, speeds. We'll be looking further at pedestrian crossings, crash information, as well as noted, we'll be watching some of the parallel streets, just seeing if people are starting to cut through the neighborhoods with the pilot. We'll be documenting those findings and those feedback. I just want to know certainly if there's a significant safety issue or something else arises, we'll be looking at that further and certainly making adjustments if needed. And then in 2023,
Can
we
you
have
clarify
the,
some of the data collection? Are you also collecting pedestrian data for use of those parallel streets currently versus after the project?
maybe can I answer that when we get to the end of the presentation?
Yep.
Yep,
Yep,
thank you.
sorry about that.
That's all right, thank you. Yeah, so 2023, we have the pilot outcome. As noted, we want to implement this. We want it to be successful. We want to meet those project goals, certainly particularly safety, maintaining livability and access, et cetera. And then noting that we're going to begin community input for the reconstruction planned in the next 5 to 7 years. And so that'll be similar to other reconstruction projects, from one sidewalk on one side of the street to the other, a full rebuild. And that'll be between the Midtown Greenway and Franklin Avenue. So in 2023, we'll start that. And about 5 to 7 years from now, we plan to complete that reconstruction. Just want to circle back at the ongoing safety improvements at 25th and 27th. So this is including the median improvements as well as crosswalk striping. So these are the so a couple of the intersections in the corridor that are not do not have traffic signals today. So we know people are turning around because they can't even cross at these locations. So this week, they started work on the medians. Last fall, they did work on all 4 corners. But this week, basically, they're starting. It'll take them about 4 to 6 weeks, but they'll be putting in new medians. They're putting in the pedestrian flashing beacons, new crosswalk striping as noted, some upgraded lighting as well. One of the other main improvements that we see here as well is 25th and 27th Streets at Lyndale become right in, right out. So we certainly saw, based on the crash history, that a number of safety issues were from those left turners and people going straight. And so by making these intersections right in, right out, it'll make it safer for all users, but particularly focusing on pedestrians and those crossing the street here. And then just rounding us out, we have an interactive map where you can give feedback. We also have the project website as well, and open up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you to the whole team. Let's see, Abigail, I see your hand up.
Hi, everybody. So thank you for bringing all this to us and this very detailed presentation. I did take a look at it earlier, and I have some specific points on specific intersections, but like, I just want to give overall comments and then turn it back to the group because we're running out of time and this is a big project. One, I truly believe that a pilot project needs more time for adjustment periods. And if you go out and you put in this pilot project in June, and then in July and August, you're like grabbing up data, people still haven't adjusted. Humans are human. Their behavior is not static. It's not like water in a funnel. Yes, maybe in July, maybe part of August, there will be some extra cars on the side streets, but eventually people on the borderline of choice will say, hey, you know what? It's nice today. I'm gonna walk, I'm gonna bike. People are gonna say, I'm not even gonna take a trip today because Lyndale's just a little bit slower. And you know what? I don't need to take a trip. People are gonna make different decisions, but they need time to adjust for that. And so I think grabbing data the minute you lay down new lanes is actually gonna give you misleading information on what people choose to do in the long term. So I do think that you should consider collecting data as well as doing community engagement and feedback in like December, November, or November, December or later, because I think you're going to actually see more accurate data on like what people are choosing to do. So that's one thing that I think is extremely problematic.
Abigail, maybe if I can respond to that, I'll note that we will be collecting feedback throughout, but specifically feedback and the data collection, we're going to start in October. So we do want some time for this to adjust.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I still think that people need a bit more time. Maybe, in Minneapolis, I feel like the 2 seasons we have are particularly important. So I think that also matters. And then I think there's a few other issues as well with in regards to like pedestrian crossing options, especially like 29th Street and the width of certain intersections, especially with right turn lanes that are just right turn lanes. I think those are problems. But I have all those detailed notes, and if not in the meeting, I hope they end up in the resolution. So I'll hand it over back to Chris.
Thank you. Let's see. Paul, I see your hand up.
Yeah, one question. So the pilot, based on your presentation, will be implemented this year and be in place through the end of 2022. So I assume that if there's no major problems, the 3-lane section would stay in place from 2023 all the way up to when you're doing the reconstruction?
That's correct, Paul. Yes.
Okay.
Does anybody else have a question or comment that I'm not noticing? Jump in if you do, please.
I've got a couple.
Julia?
And some of them are around the data collection. I'm just wondering about making sure that, I know that as somebody who lives nearby, I often avoid Hennepin or Lyndale entirely. Sometimes I make different choices so I can avoid having to cross it. And I definitely tend to take parallel streets instead. And I'm curious if you're collecting those pedestrian numbers for parallel adjacent streets for before and after. And then also wondering if you're going to be getting air quality numbers. I know that a lot of people live along Lyndale and are breathing in what we're kind of laying down, as they say, all along there. So what we can do around looking at air quality and looking at greenhouse gas reductions, including if we do see a lowering of the number of vehicles, that seems like a benefit to, or an increase in transit ridership. Either of those seem like they would be great indicators that we're making choices that are changing people's patterns in ways that are healthier for our community and for meeting our greenhouse emission reduction goals. I'm wondering if you could speak to any of those 3. And then I do have other questions, but I want to make sure other people are getting a chance.
Certainly, Julia, appreciate it. Maybe John, I guess I don't recall, and maybe John, we have to look into it further. I don't recall if we're collecting pedestrian data as well on some of the parallel streets. It might be something we have to look into.
Actually, we're not collecting pedestrian information on parallel and crossing streets. We're only collecting the pedestrian and bike information at the intersections.
It would be great to see that information being collected, especially if knowing that that information for cars is being collected. Because a lot of us are on parallel streets, not because we don't want to be on Lyndale, but because we don't feel comfortable on Lyndale.
Okay, yeah, we can sure look into that. Yeah, thanks. Okay. And then Josh, do you want me to try to, I think I can tackle the other 2 items as well, if you'd like, unless you had something you wanted to say. So air quality, yes, we will be reporting air quality as a part of the vehicle modeling that we're doing. And so that would include cars and trucks and any shift in traffic volumes, whether it goes up or down. So certainly air quality be a part of that. And then you mentioned transit ridership. We will be working with Metro Transit to get the ridership numbers after the project, and we'll probably be doing that at the same time that we're doing the traffic data collection in October.
Okay, that's great. I would just like to request that that is being discussed in terms of our goals around reducing emissions. And I'm wondering about noise pollution as well. I didn't include that in air quality, but I probably should have, just as a part of the health impacts of how the street is currently.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about noise too. And some of these same questions came up last night in the open house, and that video, or that was recorded, and that'll be posted on the county's website in a week or two. But noise did come up. As a part of our project, we're not measuring noise before and after the project. I would expect that there would be some modest changes in the noise levels, but not significant. Noise, as you know, is a difficult thing to measure and talk about. But on a day-to-day basis, it is difficult to tell the difference of a noise level change of 3 decibels. And you nearly need to double the traffic volume or cut it in half to get a change of 3 decibels. So the volume itself has to change a lot to get a really significant change in noise levels. And then a couple of other elements about noise. I don't think anybody disagrees that it's loud out there. The houses and businesses are close to the road. It's loud, but there's very little that could be done for noise in the corridor because there's really no room for noise walls. Noise walls would block access for people trying to access the neighbor properties from the roadway. If you park, you can't get out and run through the noise.
Yeah, just as a pedestrian, I know that the speed of vehicles is, as far as I can tell, one of the biggest determinants, and reducing drivers revving up to pass or speed through red lights seems like it would be helpful, but anything that reduces speed, at least in my perception as somebody who walks and often with people with some hearing loss, that kind of thing, small shifts make a huge difference. It might not be like 3 decibels overall, but it's removing those most vicious noises perhaps. So thank you for clarifying on that. I don't want to keep us on that point.
Yeah, no, I would like to add though that the more calm nature of the 3-lane will likely reduce the accelerating and passing element and the anxiety that comes from the varying noise levels that you hear from that too. So
awesome.
I hope it's a positive
outcome. If there is any chance to measure it, that would be great, but I understand that it might not be in the budget.
All right, we are trying to keep on schedule here, so I'm just going to ask Paul and Abigail. I see both of your hands up. I think Abigail, yours just went up, and Paul, was that re-up or still up?
No, I'm done.
Okay, Abigail, I think your hand went up again.
Yes, and Chris, I can also send this to you. Christopher, I can send this to you in an email. But one thing I just wanted to note, I have other notes about the safety aspect, but I think on the thing I saw, there was nothing around 29th Street. You know, it's a T intersection, 29th Street, just north of Lake Street. That is an intersection. That's also an intersection right next to the most dangerous intersection in the city for pedestrians. I think you should have all 4 legs of that intersection be given zebra striping. And I think that's also a place where you should consider an RFB for pedestrians to push as an addition, because I do think that is that's an important place. Like that's where people are going to walk around a lot. They're going to park their car on one side of the street, cross to the other. And if you want to create true safety, I think you should look at 29th Street. So I don't know why it was left off your rendition when I was looking at it, but I think that's a really important intersection that needs all 3 legs of it to be zebra striped.
Thanks, Abigail. And I'll be honest and say I don't have the background of why 25th and 27th and not 29th. That's something I can certainly dig in further. Certainly 29th, we'll be watching during the pilot, as well as in that 5 to 7 year reconstruction. We have identified that we do need improvements at 29th as well.
So it's definitely out for the pilot program. You can't put anything in, you can't even paint it.
At this time, we would not paint it without some additional crossing device. And at this time, there's not a plan to do so in this project, but in the pilot project. But as noted, in the reconstruction, we'll be looking at 29th further.
Okay.
Abigail, do you have Well, just Julie, just for a second, Abigail, do you have any additional comments that you wish to make at this time?
No, I think that's it for now.
Okay.
So, move on.
Julia, if you could maybe just ask a follow-up or a priority follow-up, and then we'll probably need to push on to concrete rehabilitation agenda item.
I'm concerned about the light timing. All of the lights seem fairly car-centric. 22nd is really, really bad, and 28th is messed up, where even though it's a one-way, there's not a walk sign when there is no possible conflict on the west side of the street. So I hope that this includes looking at those light timings to reduce the amount of time that people are waiting to cross, and making sure that the light information is giving clear information to people who are walking and using wheelchairs.
Thanks, Julia. And I just want to ask a question. You said at 28th, there's not currently a walk sign.
So there's a dedicated, if there's a left turn signal, it's a leading left for southbound to eastbound, and on the west side of the street, there's when it's green left, it's not green walk, even though no right turn is feasible because of the one way of 28.
Appreciate you noting that, Julia. We'll dig into that further.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julia. All right, I think we should probably move on to the concrete rehabilitation program presentation, but I wanted to thank the team for putting this together and presenting it. And just with one last comment, I actually live on Lindale, a touch north of this pilot program area. It's probably my least favorite street to walk on as a pedestrian. There should be no reason I shouldn't have a good time walking down to Lake Street, but it's dangerous, it's loud, it's fast. I don't like it. And so anything you can do to improve it for our city and county will be deeply appreciated for me personally. So with that, thank you, everyone. And
thank you.
We will push on to agenda item 5. Christian Zimmerman, concrete rehabilitation program 30%. Take it away, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me back. I was here, I don't know, a number of months ago to introduce. So I just want to come back. So I have 30% free today. We're actually kind of moving through this relatively quickly here on the end. These improvements will start possibly in June of this year. So we're moving through these last couple of phases pretty quickly. There's kind of 2 different pieces to this. The first piece is for Minnehaha in between Franklin Avenue and 24th Street, so pretty short. And I just want to give a little bit of background for anyone that maybe wasn't here last time, or just kind of a little bit of a refresher about this this program overall. So for concrete streets, we have approximately 155 miles of these roadways in the city. Most of these were built in the early 60s to middle 70s, so they've been around for a while. In order to maintain these, we have this program, Concrete Streets Rehabilitation, to replace partial panels or full panels of concrete, kind of fix up any of the joint repairs that there may be, sometimes some curb and gutter, other times a little bit of driveway if they're in need of it. There's also some diamond grinding that can occur at certain locations, and that's just to kind of smooth out the surface. You can kind of see with the photos on the right, you can see a lot of cracking in the surface. You can see a lot of asphalt patching that's been done over the years. So it's issues like these that the city's looking to address. And then on top of that, we look for opportunities to kind of get some construction efficiencies to improve the public right-of-way for all of the users. Specifically with Minnehaha, we do have a bike lane. So we're, looking at how can we improve, those aspects. And then also, are there specific intersections where we can gain some efficiencies and improve the pedestrian realm too? So that's a kind of a high level. I do want to shoot over to, we have 2 other roadways, and I had mentioned these the last time, and there's not a whole lot to talk on these 2 roadways tonight, but I do just want to quickly remind everyone that we are also having improvements on 42nd Avenue South in between 42nd Street and 46th Street. This is just north of like Minnehaha, you know, like Falls and the park there. And we're also looking at 44th Street East, and that's between Minnehaha and essentially the Parkway. The work down there is really just concentrated on rehabbing the existing roadway, and then we're updating all of those intersections with ADA ramps that currently aren't compliant. And so this map was shared when I originally came through, I believe, to this group, but each one of these red dots kind of indicates all of the different ADA ramps that we're updating. So I do want to kind of spend most of our time on 2 intersections that we're looking at off of Minnehaha Avenue. This is where, you know, the majority of our work and a lot of our funds are going outside of the ADA ramp work, and kind of looking at these aspects quite a bit at this first intersection here. This is the south side of Franklin Avenue on Minnehaha, and you'll notice kind of the 2 key pieces here, at least from major infrastructure that we're doing is, and I'll start on kind of this right-hand side of the roadway. Right now there's a parking bay, and there's also a pretty wide pedestrian realm where it's just a lot of concrete. So this area is within our Southside Green Zone. So we identified this area as an opportunity to eliminate a portion of that parking zone, that parking bay, and some of that additional concrete that we have for that wide sidewalk. We can maintain that 6-foot walk area, keep the pedestrian clear zone, and be able to introduce some greening and some stormwater management within there. So we'll be looking at different native plantings and ways in which we can capture stormwater runoff from the roadway, and also any you know, rain that falls on the site specifically. And then kind of the larger piece of the change is on the west-hand side, so the southbound lane of Minnehaha from Franklin. And that's an opportunity in which right now there's a pretty wide shoulder of the roadway. It's not actually striped as a bike lane today. The bike lane picks up a little further south, kind of down where my cursor is here, just to the south of the first curb cut that shows up. So we're looking to more so formalize that and turn that into and kind of make that missing segment formalized and have that bike lane. And since we have so much additional space there, we're looking at a permanent median, and that median would also be landscaped with, you know, native plantings, and would also capture stormwater runoff and any rainwater. I will note that this yellow area here that you see dashed, we looked at multiple different concepts internally at this location, and we did look at could we kind of do something with where this, you know, existing kind of island is and extend this down a little bit. Unfortunately, we're just not able to get in there. There is I forget the exact dimensions, but it's a couple feet wide in circumference of a water main that runs immediately underneath of that. And that would just involve pretty much a complete reconstruction of this portion of the roadway, of which this project just doesn't have the scope or budget for. So we really need to work in other places. So we identified closer to the curb areas, and that's kind of how we ended up with the design that we have shown here. Our other major location that we have here is Minnehaha and 21st. And this is probably I would say the intersection with the most change to it between the two. If you're familiar with this area, currently 21st comes in at a pretty steep angle into Minnehaha. It creates a lot of unsafe conditions. So in recent years, there's been some bollards placed out there that kind of follow the shape of this bump out in this top corner here that you can see. So we're looking to formalize that piece, and with that, that allows us to add additional boulevard along Minnehaha and some portion of 21st Avenue. It allows us to more formally tee up the intersection, and we can also extend and create additional pedestrian realm, including sidewalk along the roadway that's much, I'd call it, or more standard function of following the street than what we have out there today. And with that, we of course will do ADA ramps at all these locations. So right now, there's really only one ADA ramp that frankly isn't in that great of shape, kind of in this corner over here. What do you call maybe like the northeast corner? All these other locations don't have a crossing or ADA ramp, so we're adding in a lot of additional kind of legal crossings and ramps that we're missing today. And again, all these areas that are kind of hashed in this green area are all additional greening aspects that we're doing with native plantings and stormwater management, and specifically capturing stormwater runoff. And part of that is this roadway here today. A lot of it doesn't drain properly, and most of it kind of drains out into the middle of the roadway. And if you were to go to Street View or go out there in person, you'd see pretty much the middle of this intersection is all asphalt, and that's just because of the poor drainage. So there's a lot of work that'll go into just kind of those behind the scenes infrastructure at this location to kind of tilt all that towards this kind of like southeast corner to capture a lot of that stormwater runoff. We are doing a smaller bump out here in this kind of northeast corner, and that's kind of just working in conjunction with the larger one to create that proper geometry that we want for the intersection and improve those sight lines and shorten up those crossing distances as much as possible. We do have one aspect of, there's currently right over here, but just towards the edge of the screen here, you can see like a little T that's for the transit stop that's there today. Because we're adding this bump out, we are going to relocate that stop just a little further north, maybe by 70, 80 feet, something like that. So not much of a change for users. It'll still be really nicely accessible, especially with these changes. And that's kind of a pull-out bay that's existing today. The bike lanes as they are today, they will remain, they won't change. They'll just have some additional kind of protections of shortening up that exposure to any turning vehicles. And then on the southbound travel lane, we are looking at adding in 2 of our crossings with ADA ramps, and then also extending the curb out into the existing parking lane. We are working with an adjacent property owner there that has, you know, some larger vehicles that kind of operate at his site. There are 2 existing curb cuts there, so we're working with them to try and work out a plan that they can have their deliveries either done through the alley or off of 24th or 22nd Streets that are nearby. And so that way we can eliminate these curb cuts to Minnehaha, and we can get these ADA ramps and bump outs in place. With all of this, this will drastically, well, I don't want to say drastic, this will narrow up fairly significantly, I guess I would say, kind of the crossing distances of not only 21st, but also Minnehaha. So we do have some calming features there and slowing up some vehicle traffic at this location. So I think this will be a fairly, if you go out and see it today versus, you know, this fall, it'll look significantly different. So it's fairly exciting. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all to any comments or questions that you have about the program overall.
Christian, thank you for that. Will you be, is everybody hearing an echo or is it just me? Okay, no echo. Will you be looking for a motion today of any sort? Do you request one?
Yeah, I would request that we that a motion be made today, just in support if the group feels so.
And this is just a technical question I have. You know, cars, just looking at what you've got on your screen right now, cars coming off of 21st Avenue South, going either direction on Minnehaha, or I'm sorry, going the one direction on Minnehaha. You know, you've got the stop line there. Do you anticipate cars making a preliminary stop there and then making a stop closer towards Minnehaha to get a better look at traffic, sort of a two-stage stop in practice, not what you want them to do? And if there's a chance of that, is there any consideration or any chance of doing something, maybe with a raised walkway of some sort to indicate to cars that they shouldn't make a two-stage stop out of it, that they should not block the crosswalk or the trails, what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's something that, because of the geometry of how this sorts out, it is tough to get your stop bar exactly where you'd like it, with just how this has to kind of tie into Minnehaha.
Yeah.
So yeah, in practice, I would probably say that vehicles will make their initial stop here, and they probably will creep up a little closer to Minnehaha as they make this turn. I will say that the sight lines will be much improved over what's there today, not only for vehicles, but also for pedestrians, kind of making that that visual cue with that turning movement, whether they're coming from 21st or they're coming from Minnehaha. So that'll be one key aspect. But yeah, it is tough with just the geometry here of exactly how those vehicles are certainly going to make that movement, especially on that kind of right-hand turn from 21st to Minnehaha. So I think maybe, we'll want to make that stop sign really prominent there. We'll also have our stop bar, and we'll, monitor that to, if we need to kind of think through maybe some additional signage or something like that maybe says, stop here. I think that could certainly be looked at as an opportunity to just try and get those vehicles to stop at that location rather than creeping out into the intersection. But yeah, noted, it is kind of a tough spot.
Thank you. Barb?
Yeah, I'm real familiar with this area. The food club that I belong to, the Organic Food Club, had a pickup right down 21st. So we've gone there to pick up food. I've walked in that area because I used to live about 3 blocks away. And it is a terrible, terrible turn. I will tell you that it is almost impossible. And maybe the visual, maybe the way you've changed it and some of the bump outs, you'll have a little better perspective. But if you're coming out 21st and wanting to turn right, which we never did, we always, if we're driving, we always turn left to go back home. But it'd be impossible to see traffic from that stop sign, that stop line. It is historically, and you don't see all the pedestrians either. Now maybe this will make it so much better. I mean, this is a great improvement, but my experience is that because of the geometry, it's a very dangerous place to drive, walk, or bike. And I think walking and biking might be improved, but driving, it's still, I think people are going to have to creep up if they're going to turn onto Minnehaha, because I don't know how your visualization will be that much better. Can you talk about that a little bit, Kristen?
Yeah, and I think as we go, and just one aspect here of, of course, like this is just kind of a high level drawing and stuff. So as we work through that, I think kind of some of those aspects that we'll want to apply it to this as we look at that stop bar is try to fine tune where we can place that, but not putting it like, part of the difficulty is you don't want to place it too close to that pedestrian crossing too. So it's difficult. It needs to sit back a certain distance, but once you start to sit back, then sight lines really start to get impaired, and it's difficult to kind of look back over your shoulder. So I think one of the aspects we could do is try to apply our sight triangle to this and try to find where's that sweet spot, and understand that just because of the geometry of how these two roads are coming together, and we're improving it quite a bit, but try to figure out where that best situated is, and understanding that it's probably not going to be perfect just because there's just not really a perfect solution to, unfortunately, how these two roadways come together. So I think it just takes a close look at this of how can we come to the best solution possible.
If it were me and I had the money to redesign it, I would make that 21st a one-way going towards Franklin, because that's the only way it's going to be safe. Because turning onto it is not a problem, but people coming out going the other direction is really scary for drivers, for pedestrians, for anybody on Minnehaha. It's a crapshoot. It's a really bad intersection. But I can see that you're trying to make it a little better, and I appreciate that, especially for pedestrians. It looks a lot better for pedestrians as long as cars don't keep creeping up so that they can get onto Minnehaha. So that's just my 2 cents. I know you're not doing that, but that's what I would suggest doing. It's a terrible site. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Millicent, you have your hand up. I think you're going to remind me of the time. Is that correct?
Well, that too, but I just wanted to ask Christian, why can't you guys just put 2 stop signs on Minnehaha going both ways? I mean, just make the cars stop, and just like a 4-way stop, it's just a 3-way stop. And then you wouldn't have to worry about people getting run over by the cars because everybody would have to stop.
Well, I think, Millicent, if I'm understanding all of this right, I don't think it's necessarily the other, kind of, I mean, it's 2-piece here of, yes, you would need to look for vehicles kind of coming this way. So potentially, a stop would help there, but I think it's more of, it's difficult to be looking from the driver's side back towards this way. And it's also maybe not just for vehicles, but kind of a pedestrian that might be here. So kind of an aspect of that, I think, is what makes this, a pretty challenging intersection, is you're trying to look for multiple pieces back there, and a stop sign could potentially help out there. But I don't think it necessarily solves the sightline issues. And we'd have to have our traffic folks run a warrant analysis, but I would probably say that this location wouldn't meet criteria from an engineering standpoint for a 4-way stop, since it's pinned in between 2 traffic signals, would be my fairly confident outcome there, that it probably wouldn't meet the warrant analysis.
Yeah, and we do have to look at the time. It's
Well,
over
I think
15 minutes over.
Yep. With that being said, is there anybody that has this an urgent question for Christian before he leaves?
One last, I do.
Make it tight.
Just,
make it.
Yep.
Please. Yep.
Would love to see the barriers and narrowing of the Franklin southbound narrowed as much as possible into the crosswalk, so that drivers are forced to take a tighter turn instead of a sweeping turn. Thank you.
Terrific.
Yeah. Yep. And I'll just mention, we are kind of narrowing this up to be as tight as we can with maintaining kind of, so we don't have to jog the travel lane mid-block, which, we can't really do. So we are trying to narrow that up as much as we can. And we're trying to get kind of an extended paint and bollard bump out on the kind of the end of that to also give that signal to vehicles that they need to come out, and we'll fine tune this radius and stuff also. So thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation, everyone. Thank you for staying over. Full agenda, and I'm glad we got through it. And I wish everybody good evening, and we are adjourned. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.